option. He has a lot.
Tak by mohlo začít i nějaký video pro dospělý, že jo, tím názvem. Jeden Slovák, 12 klokanů. Koukneme něco ještě. Co s Viktorem, vole. Viktor!
Yo, I just want to say spoiler alert for those who haven't watched Arcane Season 2 yet. If you want to avoid spoilers, I suggest you click off this video and finish Arcane, then come back. If you don't care about spoilers, or you finish Arcane Season 2, then you're free to continue.
Pozor!
Roughly about a week ago, the next VGU was released for League of Legends, featuring Viktor, with the intent to have him more in line with the Arcane version of him following the conclusion.
Co to je za název? Ježišmarja, teď jsem to zapl, ne? Největší kurva roku. Kouknem se pak třeba, jo. Prosím tebe.
Of Season 2. An unsurprising one if I were to be honest. Of all the Arcane champions, Viktor is the one most divergent from his League version. Season 2 left a lot of people with, to put it bluntly, more questions than answers, and it's unclear as to whether the show stuck the landing, or if the plot went way too far in scope relative to the capacity they had to deliver on it. Nevertheless, we have our new Viktor, and calling his visual update divisive would be the understatement of the year. On one hand, as one of the...
A já to mám názor takový. Mně ten Viktor přijde, že má takovou jako trochu ženskou postavu. A chodí, jak kdyby měl anální kolík v prdeli.
The more outdated champions in the game, it's nice to have him get some attention. On the other, holy shit, someone get this guy a cheeseburger.
Ty titulky jsou otřesný, vole, v češtině. Sorry. Máme to do angličtiny.
Countless others have expressed their disappointment at the new version of Viktor, believing that while the Arcane series in its entirety was great to watch, they should have left well enough alone in regards to porting him over to the actual game. More on that, I wanted to discuss Viktor as a whole, as he's one of my favorite mages in League, but also one that I have a lot of things to say about. You'll notice that Riot said he would be getting a visual gameplay update, but when you take a look at his...
Vidíš to? On má postavu, jak kdyby tady měl mít prostě vagínu, ne? Má takovou jako ženskou mezeru mezi těma nohama, jak na vagínu. Či tak, když dělám tohle, jako já nejsem žádný sexista, šovinista, nebo šovinista, no, to je něco jiného trošku, sorry. Nejsem žádný úchylný hovado, jo. Samozřejmě ne. Když byste viděli tuhle postavu, komu myslíte, že patří? Ženské nebo chlapovi? I ta hruď je taková, no, jako, jdeme dál, kámo, je to takový, no.
Actual gameplay abilities and whatnot, this feels more like an art and sustainability update, the same ones given to Lee Sin and Teemo. Essentially, Viktor hasn't really changed all that much from a gameplay standpoint, which brings me to my topic for today. I want to discuss Viktor's design, addressing the controversy in regards to his old and new visuals, and talking about his gameplay and the disconnect he suffered.
No chlap by nikdy neměl takovou mezeru mezi nohama, přesně no. Tam mezera mezi nohama, to tam vypadá, kdyby tam prostě byla, vole, kdyby tam byl hudrovák, chápeš?
From due to how they retconned him. Elaborating more on what's been going on with Viktor in case you haven't kept up, or just as a refresher, there are two things people are not a fan of when it came to his reimagining. The more pronounced one, despite being the more nitpicky one, is the fact that he looks disturbingly thin, emaciated even. It is an accurate portrayal of Viktor's sickly constitution from the main series.
Takhle měl mít tu postavu, ne? Měl mít tu postavu, jak tady na tom artu, vole.
But the juxtaposition between his old and new version is beginning to get really distracting, bordering on uncanny. People especially took notice of the differences between his old and new Deathsworn version, while nowhere
Tady vypadá co normálně, no.
close to being the most imposing champion in terms of muscle mass or size. What made Viktor so intimidating of a champion is the experience of fighting a man who essentially achieved transhumanism and turned himself into a cyborg with enhanced weaponry and stuff. Compared to the new...
On vypadal prostě jako takový Warhammer Space Marine, prostě takový vesmírný mariňák, prostě nabouchaný, vole, a vylepšený technologií, no. Teď je prostě, no, teď je to, co je, no.
Version where it looks like he'd snap in two from a tap on the shoulder. In a vacuum, it doesn't look too bad, but when compared to what he had before, definitely feels like a downgrade.
Jako ten obličej rozhodně vypadá líp, teda, to určitě jo. Zbytek, nevím.
Across YouTube and throughout various discussion platforms, you'll find the sentiment in a large portion of the player base calling it the glorious revolution. On a macro narrative level, when it came to other champs like Vi, Caitlyn, Jace and whatnot, who did receive adjustments of their own, the old version and most of the things about him was effectively wiped off the face of the earth, replaced by an altogether different character who only shares the same name as him. A slight recap, old Viktor was also an inventor who used to be friends with Jace, only he was so focused on the progression of humanity that...
Nebyl s ním kamarádka od začátku, oni se potkali na nějakým si, vole, večírku nebo co, ti dva, co si pamatuju. Údajně by měli být jako nejchytřejší dva lidi v Piltoveru, nebo něco takového tam bylo, no. Že Jace byl strašně arrogantní, protože neměl žádný spolupracovníky, jako, který by byli stejně chytrý jak on. Tak byl jako zmrdek vždycky ten Jace v tom loru a Viktor byl jako jediný, kdo byl stejně chytrý jak on, takže toho jedinýho jako respektoval kvůli tomu. Ale pak se stejně dohádali, že jo, a tedy, ale to už jsem, vole, řekl tolikrát na lore kanálu, na ten story, že už nechci, jdeme dál.
becoming neurotically obsessed with it, trying to create inventions to alleviate the suffering of human lives. Eventually, it got to a point where he realized humanity itself was a weakness, including things like emotion and even the very human body. And
to s těma emocema řekl i v tom finále toho Arcaneu, že zbaví lidi slabých slabostí, který jsou třeba emoce a hlavně ty emoce. To tam jako zůstalo v tom lore trošku, ale jako v tom původním lore to bylo to hlavní, no, co ho jako motivovalo k tomu si nahradit celé to tělo těma vole robotickýma věcma, že prostě se chtěl zbavit jako emocí, což je jako, když si to tak jako přebereš, tak je to docela blbost, jo. Když si vyměníš ruku a nohu, vole, a nevím co všecko za robotické části, tak jako asi nestačíš emoce, ale jako v tom jako jeho lore by to tak jako fungovat mělo, no, nebo to říct.
So, he turned himself into a machine in a desperate attempt to transcend limitations, leading to the leaked version of Viktor, someone who is all about hex-tech augmentations and, cyberpunk 2077 type stuff. As tropey as it was, it made a lot of sense, and there are some parallels between this one and the new Viktor. Arcane Viktor is also trying to find a way to transcend humanity by overcoming his dying body, relying on the hex core to save his own life. And while Season 1 of Arcane made it look like he was going down the route of old Viktor, gradually turning his body into a machine, in Season 2 we got completely bamboozled and he went in a much different direction. Still fancying himself a savior and trying to overcome.
Zase ta motivace v tom Arcane je lepší, protože jako vyměnit si celé tělo jenom kvůli tomu, že nechceš se oslabovat emocema. To je taková slabá motivace, no. Tam jako v Arcaneu bylo dobrý, že prostě doslova umíral, že jo, tak prostě to byla daleko lepší motivace, že umíráš, než že nechceš jako emoce, jo.
The limitations of human nature, but instead of machinery, it's some kind of apocalyptic, weird, organic virus magic thingamajiggy. I honestly...
Co jako vůbec nepochopil tady to, jak se jako z toho malého hexkoru najednou udělala tady ta obrovská věc, jo. Furt mi přijde, že to je nějak s Voidem. Přijde mi, že to odhalej až někdy v budoucím nějakým seriálu třeba. Až udělají prostě ještě seriál na Noxus, pak udělají, já nevím, něco dalšího, vole. Třeba udělají seriál na Iony, jo. A pak třeba udělají nějaký obrovský event, který bude, vole, spojený se seriálem, s lolkem a se všema hrama. A bude tam třeba i Void, tak třeba konečně odhalej, že ta Arcana má nějak kořeny v tom Voidu, vole. Že to nechají jako tajemstvím tu Arcanu na dalších 10 let třeba. To si myslím, že to bude takový jejich jako trumf v rukávu.
Don't know how to describe the Arcane. In any case, for over a decade,
proto to tak jako tajej.
People saw Viktor as the Ultron of League. He wanted everyone to become machine people basically, and was a living example of that. The intentions behind old and new Viktor are the same, a desire to transcend humanity and achieve a higher state of being, mostly in the form of eliminating human emotions, but it went from going down a similar path as
jako zatím tady porovnává jen ten lore toho Viktora starý a novej, no, takže
finished, where progress is a be-all end-all no matter how ethically questionable or morally reprehensible it was, to, for lack of a better example, trying to pull a Madara Uchiha on the entire world. Definitely not what I, and I'm sure many people were
nesleduju anime.
expecting. Lore's not my strong suit, and I don't think many of my longtime viewers watch me for it, but there are certain things that
Když je to nadpozemská bytost, tak či entita, tak je jedno, či má Pingasa alebo nějakou černou díru. No asi je, a on to Arcane vypadal dobře, ale tady vypadá divně, no.
I think are necessary to draw attention to just because gameplay experience and narrative inspiration do go hand in hand. For example, the idea of Akshan, a marksman assassin, being able to revive champions even if it makes complete sense in lore, what with the whole Absolver weapon having that special property, gameplay-wise it comes off as the most ass-pulled mechanic they could think of for a champion belonging to those classes. It's a similar premise here with Viktor. Gameplay-wise, old Viktor is an accidental masterpiece. The mismatched abilities and lack of cohesion with his gameplay was highly thematic to our image of him, working just well enough to make him a veritable threat. Looking through Viktor's previous background, you can see him gradually converting himself into a machine, replacing various parts of himself one after another. The prototype Viktor depicts himself still appearing very human, having various machinery and experimenting on a bunch of different parts and weapons. Safety goggles on his head, his left arm has become mechanized, but his right arm is still wearing a glove, I believe, not to mention the fact that operating in Zon, he likely doesn't have access to the highest quality materials, machinery, and resources, requiring him to be resourceful and make do with what he can find, even if it involves putting together parts of scrap metal. By taking that same design philosophy and observing his toolkit, it adds a lot of important context, elucidating the single most distinguished aspect of him that, while otherwise a detriment if it were on other champions, is what makes him stand out in such a memorable way. None of Viktor's abilities have anything to do with each other. They're just 4 random spells that do random things and practically no synergistic aspects to each other. And it's great. When you think of most other champions, their abilities are constructed around a collective goal. Q is meant to lead into E, which is meant to lead into W, or something to that effect. A simple one would be Jarvan's EQW combo. You start with E to then allow Q to dash forward, then W giving you a stronger shield the more enemies are nearby, which is exactly where Jarvan will find himself in. The biggest distinction of Viktor is that he's characterized by abilities that retain all their functionality and usefulness in a vacuum, emblematic of him likely having assembled parts of himself one after another. Siphon Power is a boomerang projectile that deals damage, grants him a shield, and converts his next auto attack into magic damage. This ability is fully self-contained, meaning even without his passive WE and ultimate, it would work exactly like it was meant to and achieve the full effect. Gravity Field's an area control tool that slows and eventually stuns enemies who stand in it for too long. Again, you can take this out of his kit and it will do the same thing at full capacity. Death Ray projects a line of energy that damages enemies in the way. Again, a strong ability that works quite well even outside of his kit. I say his abilities have no synergistic aspects to each other because while you typically see Viktor players throwing his attacks out in rapid succession of each other, there's no actual, combos to him. He literally pulls the random bullshit go meme on you. Death Ray's a standalone ability, Siphon Power's a standalone ability, Gravity Field, and of course Chaos Storm are all standalone abilities. Not a single bit of intentional cohesion exists within his kit. An example of intentional cohesion would be, for example, Tully's Unraveled Earth mixed with her Seismic Shove. She needs one ability to make use of the other, and vice versa. And even though you could argue Viktor's Gravity Field allows him to keep enemies in place for Chaos Storm's tick damage or Death Ray's Aftershock, it's a mismatch of different weapons and tools, perfectly illustrating Viktor's old motif of having to put himself together rather than a perfectly manufactured robot. You can imagine him first opening up with the Hex Claw and conceiving the Death Ray ability, then he manages to create the device to use Siphon Power, then he constructs a Singularity to make Chaos Storm. It's one after another. Each of his abilities are souped up with power to account for there being no special synergy between
Upřímně nevím, jako o čem moc mluví, ale dobře.
them. They have to be strong.
Chápu, jako mluví o tom, že ty jeho ability nějak jako si nejsou jedna druhé podobný. A dobře, no.
On their own. In several of my Why No One Plays videos, I talked about how champs like Naafiri and Swain were torn between two mutually exclusive things, such as Naafiri being a hard engaged diver with a neutral tool, or Swain being torn between two abilities that work best from afar and two that work best up close. Viktor technically suffers from the same issues, but they made up for it by making them individually so powerful that even if you were to only use one of them, they would still get a lot done for him. In essence, they embraced the idea of Viktor being a mess of a champion and compensated for it by focusing on practicality. He's a very practical champion, paying homage to his flawed practical mindset as a character. Again, that's not to say he doesn't have issues. Viktor mains have frequently aired their grievances about his W, but in totality, he's a very functional control mage that I don't think anyone would complain about having on their team. Weak early game, yes, but a respectable mid game and devastating late game. Pretty much all of this gets thrown out the window with this new version, not the practicality of his kit mind you, more so the narrative congruity. For reference, none of his basic abilities have changed whatsoever. The only thing that was changed is Chaos Storm, now renamed to Arcane Storm. Upon scoring a takedown on enemy champions, its duration is extended and the size of the storm gets bigger. A fine quality of life change to have, and it addresses a main issue with Chaos Storm where unless you have supporting teammates to offer lockdown, this ultimate can either be really impactful or really underwhelming. Vandal tested how
No, jako no, to účko je prostě buď to strašně dobrý, nebo strašně k ničemu, bych řekl.
And suffice to say the radius can be overwhelmingly huge. Even though Viktor still retains his original intention of transcending humanity and imparting that on everyone else, when looking at his new appearance, everything comes off refined and perfect, not a detail out of place. He looks very clean, a stark contrast from old Viktor always having a messy look to him. He was unrefined, rough around the edges, intentional.
Z toho nového modelu by mu mohli dát jako tu masku, vole, a tu hůlku možná, no. Pak bych to nechal. Pak to nechal a hotové.
He was unrefined, rough around the edges, intentionally so.
A to nový účko mu dejte taky, no.
Subsequently, his whole shtick of having a bunch of random abilities conceived by Hextech don't make any sense at all. Does old Viktor's QWE and Ultimate make sense on Arcane Viktor? No. I was told that during playtesting, Viktor mains were against the more radical ideas that Riot had in mind, implying they were thinking about doing more than just give Chaos Storm the ability to expand and reset. But I think a lot of that
Stále nic nemění na faktu, že v Austrálii je 49 milionů klokanů a Uruguay má 3,5 milionu obyvatel, což znamená, každý člověk bude muset bojovat se 14 klokany. Dobrý.
had to do with the fact that whatever changes they were suggesting would have transformed Viktor into an entirely different champion, reminiscent of Aatrox and Skarner. For all the problems Viktor runs into, one thing cannot be disputed. He is a good champion. You can argue he's a victim of the game's rampant mobility creep, seeing as how 3 of his abilities heavily depend on the enemy team staying where they are, but generally, like I said, he has a great set of practical tools. A low cooldown burst trade option that both deals damage and protects him from damage, while also having great
A oni jako oklokání chystají invazi Uruguay, nebo co, vole, prostě jako říkáš.
to change tempo. 2 area has
Pak je to jako napadlo.
tools, one that controls space and the other that deals damage.
Chci třeba invadnout Slovensko, tam jich je o trochu víc, tam by byl jeden Slovák na 12 klokanů, ne třeba.
A wave clear tool that can also double as a poke tool and kiting option. He has a lot
Tak by mohlo začít i nějaký video pro dospělí, že jo, tím názvem. Jeden Slovák, 12 klokanů.
going for him, with that practical gameplay making him easy to pick up and rewarding to master. Arcane Viktor is the most dramatic departure of a champion's background in the history of League. There's simply no way Riot can implement Arcane Viktor into LoL Viktor because the tensions aside, their methodologies are fundamentally different from each other.
Ten Arcaneový a lolkový Viktor jsou prostě oba úplně jiný, no. Ale měli tam prostě jako, no, na sílu ho tam dali toho Viktora už. A i ten lore mu změnili. Jo, když chcete najít nějaký lore, hoří stačí napsat jenom LOL svět do vyhledávače. První odkaz. Všechen lore lolka je v češtině na tom webu. Tady jo. Už tady 5 nejnovějších věcí tady na této stránce. Takže vole rok starého Skarnera, no. Tady má nový lore. A ten nový lore je v podstatě to, co se s ním stalo v Arcaneu, tak to tady je popsaný. A pak, že prostě zmizel Viktor a to je celý. Ten jeho původní lore s tím Joycem už tady prostě není. Ale když si rozklikneš tady tu color story, tak tady je zase ten jeho původní lore, vole. Když Viktorova třetí paže vydávala tenký poprsek světla, který svářil kov na jeho levé paži s dokonalou přesností. To je furt ještě ten starý lore tady to zase. Jako když už předělávají vole lory, tak by mohli aspoň kompletně, ne? Tohle tam prostě narvou do toho lolka, i když se tam až tak tolik nehodí ten Arcaneový Viktor, no.
One was about assembling himself with whatever he could find, using his intellect and ingenuity to fashion hex tech into various weaponry, even going so far as to converting himself into a weapon. The other basically got merged with the hex core and started seeing all these crazy magical things, made his own hive mind cult, and then decided the best way to save humanity was, like I said, pull a Madara Uchiha and turn everyone into mentally AFK vegetables. I mean, I don't see why he feels the need to do that when...
V Arcaneu je prostě jako donutil ty lidi, aby se přidali k jeho úžasné evoluci. V tom původním loru si jako lidi mohli vybrat, že jo, jestli jim pomůže nebo ne. Že tam jako nenutil nikoho, aby se sebe udělal robota.
When my solo queue teammates are already like that, but I mean you do you.
Teda až na ty potápěče, no, ale to je na další vysvětlování.
If we were to conceptualize a full visual gameplay update for him, it would no longer be the old Viktor, which we've established can lead to a very divisive reception from the player base. Viktor's not like Gold Skarner or Nunu or Poppy, who basically had a non-existent player base. He frequently reaches pick rates above 5% depending on the meta, leading me to believe a full Arcane-inspired overhaul would do more harm than good. It just wouldn't make sense with the gameplay he has now, not only by the complaints people have towards his new appearance, but also the incongruity between LoL Viktor's design and Arcane Viktor. All in all, what I'm trying to get at is, while Arcane was great, and I love that they added Arcane-related things like skins for Jace, Vi, Jinx, Echo, and whatnot to Investa being added to the game, I think they should have just stuck to making Arcane Viktor a legendary or ultimate skin, instead of attempting to fully retcon him into the game. This is one change I'm not on board with, not because I don't like Arcane.
Měli si z toho udělat další cinkačku, vole. Měli si z toho Viktora prostě udělat, vole, gacha skin, vole, za $500 klidně, ale neměli ho tak drasticky asi měnit, no.
Or because I think there's nothing wrong with old Viktor. Rather, once again, it would be too big of a departure from the old Viktor that the Whiplash would be, and demonstrably is, too jarring. Arcane Chase, or Arcane Vi, or Arcane Jinx would have been more tolerable of a transition if that makes sense. This could be the worst take of all time, I'm not sure. Much as I love the character in Arcane, I also love the champion in League, and I feel like we could pay respect to both versions of him instead of trying to homogenize them. What do you guys think though? Do you agree or disagree with my points? Feel free to share in the comments down below. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @varsfarum, join my Discord server, and why not check out my lore to gameplay episodes on Piltover and Zon if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Se rozhodl nic moc novýho teda. Tady to je dobré koment docela, no. Že Riot se nemůže rozhodnout, jestli z něho chtějí čaroděje nebo robota. Tak tady máš čaroděje, který má robot ability, no. To sedí, no. Já nevím, jak tohle Riot vyřeší teda, no. Jestli to kámo nějak předělají ještě ten rework, protože já si nepamatuju, že by lidi jako víc nadávali na nějaký rework, vole, než na tohle. Mně teda přijde, že se nadává fakt na všechny reworky poslední roky, že? Až jako přehnaně. Že jako zase, já nevím, že se fakt brečí úplně na všechno dneska už. Co mi vadilo, tak u Skarnera ten jeho nový lore je docela dogshit, no. Starý byl teda lepší určitě. Ne, proč vůbec udělali? Ten starý Skarnerův lore byl lepší. A i se dělal trošku do Arcaneu, vole. Bylo to daleko víc deep s tím Skarnerovým starým lorem. Nechápu, že by to měnili na takovou novou generickou sračku. Jestli víte někdo, tak víte, no. Kdo nevíte, tak čumíte. Nevím, jak to vyřeší, kámo. Nevím, jak to vyřeší. Jestli udělali nějakou zlatou, podle mě by to měli nějak mixnout s tím starým modelem možná. Ten nový model se mi tam vůbec nelíbí, no. Asi to mohlo být i horší. Třeba předělej, aby nechodil jak s análním kolíkem v prdeli.